neither in the city of celestial towers nor by the cool shores, but in the most stifling, impoverished, dreadful of all forsaken corners. Amidst the ruins of an ancient world, in a desert of scorched sands, the essence was woven from the ether by the gusts of four winds. Tzeentch sent the deceit of the serpent. Khorne, the courage in war. Nurgle brought the fidelity to ideas. Slaanesh, the perseverance in mastery. With a malevolent whirlwind indivisible, their might entwined, on a cursed day, four forces created the child of chaos. And the sun, with a soul blacker than night, rose as he wished himself, but lying in oath to others, served only the true fathers. It's said that any story is as interesting as its villain is compelling. Villains embody the worst of human nature, containing within them what no one would want to face. Yet we can empathize with the villain if we know about the turning point when dire circumstances transformed them from an ordinary person into a monster. But can one born with darkness in their heart garner understanding? One who committed their crimes methodically and calculatingly, moving toward their horrific goal with the calmness of an automaton? The time has come to learn the story of Erebus, the most powerful commander of the Word-bearers, who began a tale whose consequences will forever remain in the galaxy. He grew amidst the dust and poverty of one of the provincial cities of Colchis, in a household of the lowest caste. A boy from such a family had no chance to rise to become a truly affluent person, although he didn't even try. Most of his childhood, the future architect of the heresy wasted in idleness, fantasies about wealth falling from the sky and other useless things, making him a disappointment in his own parents' eyes. He would sit for hours in the shadow of his father's house, entertaining himself by catching scorpions. The boy would grasp the dangerous creatures and tear off their limbs, delighting in the insects' torments, though some scorpions managed to sting the cruel child. The risk of being poisoned and spending the next month in fever added a special interest to the game. The boy wanted to know how close he could get to his prey and how long he could torment it before getting stung. This strange thrill would stay with him for many years, turning into something far more frightening. The boy fantasized about incredible luxury, numerous slaves and concubines, dreamed of gaining power that would allow him to toy with people, just as he did with the unfortunate scorpions, but did not want to work at all. The solution came to him naturally. The observant teenager realized that to obtain what he desired, he just needed to become one of the church's servants. It's believed that the followers of the ancient religion of Colchis among the Covenant high priests were pious ascetics preaching the humility of flesh. In reality, however, the priests typically indulged in drunkenness, debauchery and gambling, spending the donations believers brought to decorate the temples. The common people had no illusions about where their money was going. However, changing anything seemed impossible. The theocratic state brutally suppressed any dissent, exiling and killing the bravest. The clergy caste was not respected by the local population and was perceived as a perpetual parasite, draining the last blood from the impoverished people under speeches of afterlife bliss. Yet, the future Dark Apostle was enchanted by the prospect of enriching himself and gaining power effortlessly, and thus saw immense opportunities in serving the church. The teenager imagined himself in luxurious clothes amidst a palace with a huge fountain capable of driving away the eternal Colchis heat. There he saw slaves clad in silk, counting endless amounts of gold coins. Between the beautiful vision and the ambitious youth arose a reality where only some offspring of wealthy parents could go to seminary. The church was riddled with decay, but its servants clung tightly to power, allowing only those fortunate enough to be born into rich families with good connections to study. All others could only hope for poverty, but the ambitious teenager was not going to give up on his intentions. He began to spend time at temples, watching the priests and acolytes, eavesdropping on their hymns, memorizing the order of yet unknown words by heart. As he grew older, he learned how to sneak into scriptoriums, from where he stole books with catechisms and litanies. The young man did not find meaning in what he read. He studied the text, but did not understand the content. Yet fate prepared him the path of a preacher, making his studies exceptionally easy. In those years he did not believe in the sacred texts, considering religion merely a tool to achieve his goals. The young man took inspiration from the calculating and greedy high priests whose lifestyle so strongly lured him. His parents did not notice the diligence with which he approached his studies and could not appreciate the efforts needed to penetrate the temples. Instead, they set another young man as an example for their son, whose diligent attitude towards education and faith was more obvious, as it manifested in the litany texts written right on his shaved head. Tired of his mother's endless reproaches, the future word-bearer chaplain wondered, could he really become like the pious guy, considered a role model for all young citizens? To obtain the answer, the youth ambushed the seminarian and strangled him. Then he stole the unfortunate's modest belongings, including books and henna for skin decoration. But the main loot was the identity appropriated by the murderer. The young villain left his hometown, calling himself the name stolen from his victim. Now he was called Erebus. The real name of the most cunning son of Lorgar will forever remain a secret, hidden even from the gods. He began imitating demons who keep their real names secret before he even learned of their existence. Committing such a monstrous crime at such a young age would have been a tragedy for anyone else, but in this case, the killer felt only a surge of strength and happiness, filling his heart with hymns. Having disposed of the victim's body, Erebus shaved his hair, wrote revelations from religious texts on his own face, and then left his hometown, heading to where no one knew him. Now imitating the slain original, he woke up before dawn to apply a prayer to his head, which delighted other believers. As before, Erebus did not believe in any of the sacred phrases, using the inscriptions to mask his face. However, everything changed subsequently. Thanks to stolen documents, he managed to get into the Varadesh seminary, finally gaining access to full education. But while the other students spent their energy on theology, Erebus paid attention to how churchmen used their power. He was interested in methods that allowed a single withered priest to hold the attention of thousands of parishioners and prompt people to take necessary action with just one quietly spoken word. Now the young man wanted to gain not just wealth but also eloquence, the power of persuasion capable of bringing real power. The more diligently he studied, the more meaningful the religious texts became. Now, even deep down, Erebus felt no disdain for the outdated methods of atoning for sins. Unexpectedly for himself, the acolyte came to believe in what he preached. He began to study the texts of the covenant even beyond necessity, spending nights in the church library. That's when Erebus first felt the presence of powers closely watching his actions. Looking at himself in the altar mirror, the young man saw not one, but 4 reflections, and understood. He, a mere speck in the stream of eternity, could assist these mysterious entities, in whose hands even the covenant was merely a toy. However, at that period, the old faith was living its last days. Across the planet, news spread of a huge army led by the Golden Prophet, who intended to change the world and cast down the old gods from the heavens. Fearing the loss of their acquired wealth, the hierarchs of the covenant began to make more sacrifices and sincerely repent their sins. Erebus knew all this was futile. The priests of the old church had no chance of salvation. The young man began to think of the Golden Prophet and wonder if he could find a way to join the new, more successful religion. His former mentors no longer seemed to him examples to follow. Now the acolyte saw in them only weakness and decrepitude. He wanted to be near someone dangerous and possessing real power. When Erebus finally saw Lorgar appear in the capital, he felt neither joy nor despair. The Golden Prophet was the embodiment of perfection, at the sight of which the locals cried for happiness and fell to their knees. But Erebus did not share the general ecstasy. He saw in Lorgar only another curious scorpion, one that warranted a closer approach to determine just how potent its sting could be. The Golden Prophet and the new faith toppled the Church of the Covenant, but failed to eradicate it entirely. The most steadfast fanatics, including Erebus, continued to secretly worship the old truth. They gathered in places hidden from prying eyes, where they chanted ancient litanies to the tune of new ones, and rejoiced in the fact that the prohibition only made their faith stronger. However, these harmless meetings were not the extent of their actions. The followers of the Covenant made plans, wove intrigues, and eliminated those who obstructed them, quietly replacing everyone around Lorgar with suitable individuals. Like the others, Erebus knew that the Emperor, often spoken of by the prophet, would soon reveal himself. The young man longed to see the master of mankind, but only because he was certain his fate was not to vomit forth the golden deity. Even before the Emperor's arrival on Colchis, Erebus was aware of the role the ancient gods had prepared for him. Therefore, unlike the others, he was never enchanted by the image of the master of mankind, and from the very beginning merely pretended to embrace Lorgar's faith in the god Emperor. Embracing his own role as a villain and deceiver, even in his youth, never seemed demeaning to Erebus. He accepted himself and did not strive to become someone else, understanding that he was fulfilling his destiny and was in his rightful place. The secret followers of the Covenant were the first to volunteer for ascension and join the ranks of the Spacemarine Legion. Like other believers, Erebus considered altering the sacred human form a blasphemy, but also a necessity. In those days, he was on the brink of adulthood, not yet a man, but already too old for the transformation into an Astartes to be painless. During the process of transformation, most of the Covenant adepts died, failing to gain the mighty bodies they aspired to. But not Erebus. His success was not solely due to physical characteristics, but also his firm belief in his convictions. The ascension caused the recruits such terrible pain, unlike anything any of them had experienced before. Because of this, many lost their faith, believing that their suffering indicated that the gods did not grant them their protection. Erebus had no such doubts. He required no proof of the existence of ancient powers, nor did he ever hope that the gods would ease human lives. Overcoming the pain, which he likened to having his flesh turned inside out, Erebus gained the body of a powerful being of terrifying strength. He became a Space Marine of the 17th Legion and could now boldly stride where he once had to sneak. The new form delighted him, and Erebus often spent time alone, admiring his own reflections in mirrors. He learned to wield unfamiliar weapons, don power armor, and use all its capabilities. However, the goals of the Great Crusade disgusted the warrior. Erebus understood the appeal of a safe universe, separated from the chaotic otherworldly realm and founded on the basis of ancient science. But he could not share this ideal. The warrior continued to inscribe onto his face words from the sacred books of the Covenant, choosing ambiguous phrases that equally suited both the secular truths of the Imperium and the ancient religion of Colchis. Among the legionnaires, Erebus exhibited the outstanding quality of a charismatic orator, capable of winning the trust of any stranger. Being a cunning manipulator, he knew exactly what to say and how to act around any influential leader, and even the words on his face were chosen accordingly, to the morals of whoever was the Legion's ally at the moment. Over time, the need for paint disappeared. New tattoos with various meanings began to appear on his shaved skull by themselves. Erebus was not the strongest fighter or the most gifted commander, but he still advanced in service, receiving one promotion after another. His unique feature was absolute confidence in himself and his goals, and thus the warrior, carefully and unhurriedly, improved, knowing that sooner or later he would achieve his desires. He did not need to make fateful decisions or face hard choices until a certain moment. Simply waiting patiently was enough, during which Erebus enjoyed understanding who he truly was. However, he did not consider himself the main hypocrite of the Great Crusade. On the day of his first warp jump, Erebus looked out the porthole, and the spectacle that could drive others mad made the warrior laugh. He was amused by the absurdity of what was happening not in the warp, but on deck. It seemed unthinkable that people, literally throwing themselves into the realm of forces, could believe the Emperor, who claimed that the beyond did not exist. Erebus laughed, understanding that no system could long stand on such an exceptional lie. After spending several years in the Great Crusade, the word-bearer realized that the Emperor's cause, aimed at protecting humanity and the final expulsion of the old gods, in fact only contributed to the opposite. Bloody wars, murders, extermination of entire civilizations brought planets under the domain of the Imperium. However, The echo of this massive violence was reflected in the warp and made the dark gods closer to reality than ever before. In the years when Erebus attained the position of the first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, his abilities to foresee the future were not yet sufficiently developed. However, he could sense and predict events in an abstract form. Before the first landing on the moon of Davin, which was being brought to compliance at that period, the warrior did not sleep for 4 nights, anticipating some special event. The Imperial forces planned to grant the local population secular truths, but Erebus knew this would not happen. He saw the fate of Davin as clearly as his own reflection in a mirror. The planet was similar to Colchis, harsh, scorched by the sun, and keeping secrets of antiquity. As the lunar wolves and word-bearers were engaged in battles with the locals, Erebus ventured into the desert, where mysterious temples and tombs were hidden. Unlike everyone else, the chaplain understood that the frenzied resistance of the population, who threw themselves at the Astartes in suicidal attack, was not madness. People sacrificed themselves in order to distract the Imperials from what was hidden among the sands. He landed at the foot of an ancient city temple, whose crumbling stone walls formed an 8-pointed star. This extraordinary structure didn't seem as large as some of the cathedrals of Colchis, but it was created with an absolute understanding of the connection between the real and the unreal. When the sun's rays were correctly aligned, the towers cast strange shadows on the ground that resembled horns and claws, and the temple walls were adorned with figures of gargoyles and stone dragons. The place looked abandoned and uninhabited, however. Erebus encountered a grotesque priest who greeted the warrior as though he was a minor servant who had taken too long to fulfill an errand. The atmosphere of the ancient temple, which had appeared to the word-bearer in dreams before, made him dizzy. The connection of death and power seemed so all-encompassing that the warrior felt intoxicated. The priest called Erebus the Herald and led him through the halls of the temple, showing ancient frescoes depicting angels fighting demons and knights battling monsters. In the center of one of the halls, the chaplain saw an altar for sacrifices, covered in inscriptions similar to those that adorned his own body. On the walls of the sanctuary, there were many different paintings, all featuring the same crude flint blade. Erebus felt as though the event he had been moving towards for many years was supposed to happen in this temple, but understood that the necessary weapon was located somewhere else. Finding it and bringing it to Davin became the warrior's new task. Before leaving the priest, the Spacemarine ordered him to restore the temple, promising that the future planetary governor would provide all the necessary resources. From his early years, Erebus had not changed his beliefs, considering his loyalty to the powers as an integral part of himself. For many years, he continued to oversee the operation of the secret lodge of the Covenant followers, perfected his skill, and pretended to follow the teaching of the Primarch about the Emperor's divinity. The incident when the Master of Mankind chastised Lorgar for leading the war inefficiently and spreading religious misconceptions opened up an opportunity for Erebus to finally share his true views with the Primarch. The burning of Monarchia and the subsequent shameful punishment, carried out in the presence of another legion, inflicted significant psychological damage on the word-bearers. The Space Marines felt shame, unsure of what to believe in or what to rely on, while Lorgar withdrew from his sons, locking himself in his chambers. The Primarch did not know how to manage the Legion and continue the crusade without the principles that had structured his whole life. Then Erebus, together with Cor Phaeron, who also belonged to the adepts of the old faith of Colchis, proposed to Lorgar to consider the ideas of the Covenant. The first chaplain looked down on the Primarch's adoptive father, considering him utterly devoid of honor, but the general idea forced them to act jointly. Lorgar was deeply engulfed in grief and had no plan of his own to emerge from the crisis. Thus, he did not notice the deception and accepted the proposed option. Erebus and Cor Phaeron skillfully ensnared the Primarch, making the events with the monarchy seem less terrible to Lorgar than how he himself had treated Colchis. The two word-bearers exacerbated the feeling of guilt in the Primarch's soul, but also showed him an opportunity to amend his actions. It was difficult for Lorgar to admit his own mistakes, however. In the end, He believed the warriors, calling Erebus the wisest and most noble of his sons. The moment the first chaplain had waited for years had come. The Primarch agreed to study the ancient beliefs, and the secret union of the Covenant followers got the chance to finally use the accumulated forces. While Lorgar was occupied with the search for the true gods, Erebus, along with Cor Pharaon, took over the management of the word-bearers. Thanks to the outstanding abilities of the first chaplain, the Legion demonstrated incredible efficiency, thus masking the temporary absence of the Primarch and his focus on forbidden goals. For several decades after Lorgar's return from the warp, Erebus led purges within the ranks of the word-bearers, eliminating all who seemed insufficiently loyal. During this time, tens of thousands of Space Marines were destroyed. However, the Legion still grew, becoming eventually one of the most numerous. The Primarch fully relied on Erebus, allowing him to act independently. It is believed that even Lorgar's famous book largely consists of the words of the first chaplain. Years after the crimes orchestrated by Erebus, he is considered a villain, invoking no sympathy. And it is astonishing how the contemporaries blinded by intrigues were deceived. However, in the final stages of the Great Crusade, the warrior possessed the ability to charm and win the trust of everyone he needed. Finding himself on the flagship of the 16th Legion, a few weeks before the encounter with the Interrex, Erebus ingratiated himself with most of the Lunar Wolves, including the Mournival and the Warrior. Arriving supposedly with an important mission, the chaplain managed to create the impression of an understanding and selfless Astartes, capable of putting aside his tasks for the well-being of Horus. He immediately offered his assistance to the Lunar Wolves, rightfully earning the position of advisor warrior. The Space Marines described Erebus as a charismatic warrior with a pleasant and soft voice, inspiring trust from the first minute. The chaplain possessed a cold beauty, refined manners, and an impressive list of combat achievements. The Astartes respected him for his constant composure, immense patience, and valor. Erebus never sent his warriors into battle without leading them personally. Another virtue of the word-bearer was his easygoing nature, which allowed him to quickly find common ground with any other warrior. Despite his high rank, the first chaplain did not display arrogance towards the members of the Mournival and was amiable towards the customs of the Lunar Wolves, sharing meals with them, drinking after shifts, and even practicing martial skills. During one such training session, Erebus successively overcame 2 members of the Mournival, then engaged in a duel with Lucius from the Emperor's Children Legion. Although the chaplain was already exhausted from the previous opponents by the beginning of the fight, he proved to be more than a worthy opponent for Fulgrim's finest swordsman. The warriors fought without pause and stops for 16 minutes, making 4 lunges per second. The movements of the naturally gifted Lucius were dictated by fury and talent, while each of Erebus's strikes was the result of calculation. To those observing the duel, it might have seemed as though the first chaplain was an automaton set to the highest difficulty. The opponents appeared to be equals, but at the end of the battle, Lucius disarmed the chaplain and held his blade to his throat. The skill of the best fencer of the Emperor's Children is hard to doubt. Yet there remains a chance that Erebus intentionally missed the blow to endear himself to Lucius and not disturb this self-loving swordsman. When it was revealed during the first encounters with the Interrex civilization that this offshoot branch of humanity lived in symbiosis with the Kinebrak species, Erebus first led Horus to think that the model of the universe proposed by the Emperor was too constricting. By that time, the warrior had already suffered several failures in his new status and was eager to find a way not to disappoint his father. Horus was burdened with many unpleasant duties and a vast mass of the most complex problems requiring immediate solutions. Therefore, he desperately needed to create a world with such an advanced segment of humanity. However, this was not meant to happen. Erebus provoked the start of a war by secretly infiltrating the Interrex weapon hall and stealing a sword created by the ancient masters of the Kinebrak species. The stolen blade Anatheme was crafted using ancient technology that humanity could not replicate. The Interrex did not consider it sorcery, but it was hard to deny the presence of psychic energy in the creation of such swords. It was assumed that each weapon was dangerous and deadly, created for a specific purpose it was bound to fulfill. Committing the crime, Erebus knew anathema was the very sword he had seen on the walls of the sanctuary, the blade destined to change the cosmos. Taking the weapon, the chaplain secretly transported it to the moon of Davin, to the temple where he had first seen it several decades earlier. Later, the anathema was given to Governor Eugen Temba, who had turned to the side of chaos. Horus perceived the war and the subsequent destruction of the Interrex as his personal failure. The Primarch was enveloped in despondency, distancing himself from his sons and spending almost all of his time in his personal quarters, where only Erebus was allowed entry. Lupercal no longer heeded the advice of warriors from his own legion, as if he noticed nothing but the chaplain's words. Such behavior of the warrior frustrated the Mournival, and despite their good relations, the sons of Horus began to desire the departure of the word-bearer. Through skillful intrigue, Erebus created a situation in which the Primarch was forced to visit Davin. For weeks, the chaplain imposed ideas on the warrior that nobody else would dare voice, but even a weary and saddened Horus was an exceedingly perilous subject for scheming. One can only guess at the words Erebus spoke to Lupercal in private, but they, combined with the dire circumstances of the crusade, significantly altered the Primarch's behavior. The chaplain, unlike most of Horus's sons, was a skilled manipulator and had carefully studied the warrior as though he were a scorpion from his Colchissian childhood. Erebus understood the peculiarities of the Primarch's character so well that he even allowed himself to publicly interrupt him, directing Horus's wrath onto the rebellious governor of Davin. It may be assumed that the chaplain's overly apparent actions should have been deciphered by the Primarch and his sons. However, it is important to remember that all of them were warriors, unaccustomed to such tricks, and betrayal by a Space Marine during that period seemed unimaginable. Erebus threw Lupercal off balance, causing him to display impulsiveness which forced the warrior to personally lead a squad on Davin. The word-bearers also took part in that mission, but what was perceived by the sons of Horus as noble assistance was, in reality, control over the situation. The chaplain made sure that Lupercal made all the mistakes necessary for the successful initiation of the treacherous scenario. When the wounded warrior was unconscious, the sons of Horus, prepared by Erebus, were in such despair that they were ready for any, even the most sacrilegious deed to save their father. He manipulated words so adeptly that members of the Mournival did not perceive the dark ritual to heal the Primarch as sorcery. And information alleging that it was Erebus who had stolen the sword from the Interrex and started the war was completely overlooked. The warrior was locked in the temple hall, which the chaplain of the word-bearers had ordered restored years ago. Cultists of the Serpent Lodge explained to the Space Marines that no one but Lupercal himself could open the sanctuary doors. While the loyal sons of Horus waited for the Primarch at the temple gates, Erebus was inside with the priestess, conducting a mysterious ceremony. The cultists offered a sacrifice to the gods of chaos, killing a young woman and dividing her heart among themselves. Erebus, like the others, swallowed human flesh, learning through homophagy the last thoughts of the unfortunate woman. She had no idea she would become a sacrifice, and this treachery was done in glory of Tzeentch. The consumption of the bloodied heart was dedicated to Khorne, while the preceding death and desecration of a young woman perpetrated by a sick pervert pleased Nurgle and Slaanesh. The first chaplain calmly observed the proceedings, understanding that without such actions, it was impossible to attract the attention of the dark gods. However, he failed to account for the final necessary conditions of the ritual. Before the Astartes could react, a priestess raised the ritual dagger and slit Erebus's throat. Death was a mandatory part of the spell, allowing the chaplain to transfer to the lost consciousness of Horus in the warp. The ruinous powers placed the warrior in an infinite trap that drove him mad with metaphorical visions of betrayals and demise. Erebus penetrated the Primarch's mind, donning the guise of one of the favoured sons of Lupercal. Masquerading as a noble warrior, the word-bearer showed Horus partially truthful pictures of the past and future. However, the chaplain was not the only one who had infiltrated the warrior's consciousness, intending to influence his choice. Erebus's opponent was Magnus the Red, who stripped him of his false guise, revealing the truth to Lupercal about what was happening. Attacking the word-bearer with magic, the Lord of Prospero addressed his brother, demanding he show resolve and not listen to the liar's speech. But even an enraged Magnus was unable to influence the outcome. Erebus twisted the Primarch's words, not forgetting to emphasize that he contradicted himself by demanding loyalty to the Emperor while also violating the Nicaea Edict. The dispute between Magnus and Erebus placed them on equal footing in the eyes of the warrior, who was by then poisoned by envy and resentment towards his father. Informing Horus about Lupercal's defection to the side of the ruinous powers, the chaplain cunningly chose his words, sparking in the Primarch a desire to appear as the foremost chosen of the dark gods. According to Erebus, the Warp's lords had no need for physical space. They simply wanted to claim the Emperor who had once deceived them. If Lupercal had managed to accomplish the god's mission, he would have become the new master of mankind, capable of building a different, more just imperium. Thanks to Erebus's cunning speeches, the warrior decided to betray his father, confident in his independence as he believed he had avoided Magnus's manipulations. Following the events on Davin, Erebus continued to stay close to the fallen Horus, playing on his arrogance, selfishness and lust for power. He acted as the Dark Aide and the Primarch's main advisor, but in reality he served not the warrior, but only the ruinous powers. Under the guise of the edict, the traitors sent emissaries across all legions, organizing secret warrior lodges within them, which became the breeding grounds for heresy. With Erebus's help, a nightmarish operation was planned on Istvan III. Additionally, the chaplain added to the execution list those sons of Horus whom he disliked and deemed insufficiently loyal. In this, likely, the experience he had gained during the ideological purges among the word-bearers came in handy. Then Erebus returned to his legion, playing a significant role in the battle at Istvan V. Even after the start of the heresy, Lorgar remained too sentimental. The first chaplain and Cor Pharaon needed incredible patience and dexterity to keep the Primarch on the path of violence. They had been planning a civil war in the Imperium for years, and were not about to let Lorgar spoil everything with his misplaced compassion for his brothers. During the attack on Calth, Erebus performed a ritual that conjured a deadly storm, separating the eastern fringe of the galaxy and preventing several loyal legions from joining the defense of Terra. The Shadow Crusade became another stage in purifying the word-bearers of those who did not understand Lorgar's vision. Some warriors, fighting with the Ultramarines out of vengeance for the monarchy, were destroyed. For the main goal of the 17th Legion in the realm of Reboot Guilliman was to inflict suffering, from which a colossal warp storm was born. By that time, the might of Erebus, endowed with a special blessing of the Dark Gods, had reached scales that no one, including the Primarch, could boast. The first chaplain was easily able to create portals and move across the galaxy. His visions of the future became much more transparent, and his combat power increased manifold. In addition, at the request of his former student Argel Tal, Erebus resurrected the word-bearer's talisman woman Cyrene Valantion. Unlike many others, the first chaplain did not consider his unique abilities something to be proud of. He called himself and his own talents merely tools that were needed to achieve the goals set. Erebus was guided by cold calculation, calmly agreeing to make concessions and sacrifices. He was not interested in immediate profit or glory, only in the triumph of the destructive forces. However, most of the first chaplain's allies could not share such an outlook. By the finale of the Shadow Crusade, even Lorgar, once considering Erebus the best of his sons, preferred to renounce him. The first chaplain tried to convince his father of the necessity of the operation on Cygnus Prime, which, in his opinion, should have ended with the transition of the Primarch Sanguinius to the side of Chaos. Lorgar knew his brother well and understood that such a thing was impossible. However, the overconfident Erebus did not want to listen to him. He rudely addressed his own genetic father, speaking to him in a disrespectful tone and emphasizing that he was no less significant a figure than the Primarch. Lorgar learned that in the battle on the surface of Nuceria, the first chaplain killed Argul Tal, believing that without this, the warrior's best friend, Khan from the World Eaters, would not be able to become the champion of the Blood God. This caused anger in the Primarch, but for some reason he did not want to destroy the treacherous Space Marine himself. Lorgar disclosed information about the assassin of Argul Tal, Khan, intending in this way to eliminate his own treacherous son through the hands of another. Despite his rage, the World Eater did not attack Erebus at the first opportunity. Instead, he summoned the Word-Bearer to a deadly duel in the training cage. The battle forced Erebus to demonstrate skills far surpassing those he had shown in combat against Lucius of the Emperor's Children. Yet even this was not enough to overcome Khan. During the duel, a shocked Erebus saw his own death in the eyes of the World Eater. Never before had any of the thousands of future probabilities shown him his last moments of life. Khan dealt several devastating blows to the chaplain, knocked his croziers from his hands and cut off his hand, but justice did not prevail. At the crucial moment, Erebus teleported away, using an athame, one of the 8 daggers he had created based on the anatheme. The chaplain's failures continued after the battle at Cygnus Prime, ending precisely as Lorgar had predicted. Convincing the warrior to send angels into a chaos-infested system, Erebus acted against the words of his Primarch. However, the failure with his genetic father did not serve as a lesson for the chaplain. Talking to Horus, he once again behaved arrogantly. Claiming that Lupercal was to blame for the failure of plans to convert Sanguinius. For this audacity, the warrior punished Erebus, slicing the skin from his face with the athame. Disfigured by those he considered, despite all his failures, he still considered himself the hand of fate, the creator of the galaxy's future. Despite the severe injury that brought him to the brink of survival, Erebus laughed. Even the result of the terrible encounter with the warrior had been predicted by the chaplain long before it happened. The Word-Bearer's body mutated under the influence of the warp. His skin became coarser and darker, horns appeared on his head, and his eyes took on a bloody hue. Erebus considered this a blessing. Lorgar and the warrior had left him, but the gods, as always, were close by. Acting according to his mysterious plans, the chaplain helped ensure that John Grammaticus received a weapon made of fulgurite, with which he planned to kill the Primarch Vulcan. As in the past, Erebus committed unthinkable and inexplicable acts, knowing that if events unfolded correctly, a series of coincidences would lead to the triumph of chaos. During the Siege of Terra, the Dark Apostle made his way into the house of Erda, the genetic mother of all Primarchs, and tried to convince her to join the traitors. He knew that the woman, being one of the most powerful psykers in the galaxy, also had long-standing disagreements with the Emperor. After Erda refused, Erebus summoned 4 greater demons to kill her. The woman managed to destroy all the unborn, but she was heavily wounded and depleted in the battle. The Word-Bearer tried once more to force Erda to turn away from the Emperor and acknowledge the might of Erebus himself. The mother of the Primarchs responded with a harsh refusal, and then the chaplain killed her. After the defeat of the traitors in the battle for Terra, Erebus fled to the Eye of Terra, along with the remnants of the Word-Bearers. Since then, he has been a member of the Dark Council, a coalition of warriors ruling on behalf of Lorgar. Erebus is in a perpetual state of power struggle with Cor Phaeron, as the Primarch is distracted from events and does not leave his tower on the demonic world of Sicarus. The Dark Apostle participated in the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler, leading an army of the Word-Bearers in the Cadian sector. Through his efforts, millions were sacrificed to the Chaos Gods, aiding the emergence of forces of the unborn on Cadia and other imperial worlds. Over millennia, Erebus has committed numerous atrocities, each capable of shocking with its cruelty. He conducted ritual murders and tortures, sacrificed the population of whole star systems to the dark gods, betrayed allies, and never cared about anything but his own interests. His main crime is often referred to as the ignition of heresy. However, the drive to bring ruinous forces to triumph and overthrow the emperor was not an evil intent born in Erebus's mind. Treachery was the foundation of his nature, without which the word-bearer could not exist. He never changed his beliefs, and never, even in the hardest moments, regretted his choice. For every action of Erebus, no matter how high its cost, was directed towards removing the false emperor from eternity.